Now, our gospel reading this morning forms the very end of the book of John, and it is thought of often, the second half of it, as a later addition. It was used or added to explain the birth of the church. It occurs shortly after that first Easter morning. Peter, Jesus' most influential disciple and perhaps closest friend, has returned to his former occupation, fishing. 3 years of following the man that he knows to be the Messiah, a concept so large and broad, I'm not sure we can conceive of it. 3 years of following him, of learning, of training, and then Jesus goes and gets himself executed. And Peter denies knowing him. All of the disciples struggle with what to do next, and they go back to fishing, as they have always done. Having done so, Jesus seeks them out yet again for breakfast. So listen now for the word of God speaking to you in this reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 21. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, "Children, have you no fish?" They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he had been naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in on the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come, have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to Jesus, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But then you grow old, and you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And after this he said to him, "Follow me." Here ends the reading. Will you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, for you are our rock, and in the life and resurrection of Jesus, our Redeemer. Amen. That final night that they had together, just a few short weeks before today's reading, when Jesus had led them in their Passover ritual, he had told them that things would get tough, that Peter would run, that he would deny even knowing him, the most important person in his life. Peter couldn't believe it to be true. It vows unbidden that it would not be true. No matter what, Jesus says, remember when you break the bread and drink this cup, that all the horrible things that happen cannot be overcome except by love. These things are about forgiveness and the ways wholeness springs forth like seedlings from the cracks in our souls. But indeed, when Jesus is dragged away, it becomes clear that his trial is for entertainment purposes only, and Peter falters. Do you know this man? He is asked 3 times, and each time progressively and more insistent. I do not, he replies. I do not. I do not. And the 3rd time, it sinks in. He has done what he thought he could never do. Given up on the person for whom he has already given everything. Turned away from the version of himself he has cultivated with this prophet, this man of God. Turned away from his new, fuller, richer identity as a man of love and forgiveness and fulfillment. Don't you know him? I do not. And don't you think a piece of him cracks right then? Just as surely as the broken bread. Just as surely as Jesus' body. Now we know that Peter was married, so he knows what it is to make a vow, and now he knows what it is to break it. Now the church has long obsessed over Peter's sins and failings, the way he left Jesus when Jesus needed him most, and I like to think we harp on Peter because it makes us feel better about ourselves. But I don't think Peter's sin was against Jesus. Not really. Jesus tells Peter in advance what he's going to do, not out of dismay, but out of reality. In all likelihood, what Peter did was the smart thing, even if it involved a lie. There was no use in them all being hung up on trees. No, Peter's failing is against himself. Who he wanted to be, the man who believed in the possibility of redemption and wholeness, not in some far-off end time, but now and in the present. Now, perhaps after the crucifixion, Peter had changed his mind, decided that this wasn't for him, but we know that that isn't the case. Because when Jesus appears, Peter leaps from the boat and runs through the water, which is a slow-motion romance movie shot, if ever there was one in Scripture. No, Peter's failing was that with all that he'd seen, he lost faith in himself. He lost faith in faith. So Jesus takes him and they walk down the beach. I'm sure Peter's heart drops. So far he can feel it in his recently full belly. We've all had this conversation. Long after the spring-like certainty of a new relationship births promises that are far too large to keep, and what feels like longer after they were broken, we find ourselves estranged from our partners, from ourselves, from the thing we thought we could rise to, being there for him, letting that argument go, being a better parent than our parents had been, a better partner, kicking the habit. And we find ourselves walking on the beach with our heart in the pit of our stomach, about to have that conversation. You all know the one. Is this going to work? Can I forgive myself? Can I trust you? Are you committed? Where do we go from here? Now, how the conversation goes, I believe, rests firmly on which of these questions are asked. The Reverend Charles Spurgeon, writing in 1857, put it this way to his congregation. Note what the question was. It was a question concerning Peter's love. He did not say, Simon, son of Jonas, fearest thou me? He did not say, dost thou admire me? Dost thou adore me? Nor was it even a question concerning his faith. He did not say, Simon, son of Jonas, believest thou in me? He asked him another question. Lovest thou me? And note again that he did not ask Peter anything about his doings. He did not say, Simon Peter, how much hast thou wept? How often hast thou done penance? How often hast thou on thy knees sought mercy at my hand for the slight that thou hast done me, and for that terrible cursing and swearing wherewith thou didst disown thy own Lord, whom thou hast declared thou would followest, even to prison and to death? No. Jesus asks if Simon, the one he had renamed Peter, the rock, loves him. Peter, is this where your heart is? And Peter answers not with proof, not by listing all the ways he has shown his love, not by recounting his actions or his prayers, but with an intimacy born of struggle. You know I love you. Whether we find ourselves the one in need of a new start or in need of granting them, the question from which all else follows is not one of blame. It does not seek to punish. In fact, it is not related at all to the past. It looks only forward. Do you love me? Perhaps it is Peter's lack of response that prompts Jesus to ask again. Perhaps it is a realization that Peter is still focused on their relationship and not what is to come. Perhaps it is because he knows that it takes several times to get someone's attention. Perhaps it is the perfect symmetry of 3 denials and 3 affirmations. Or perhaps he wants Peter to pay attention not just to the lambs, but to the sheep. He needs Peter to see himself as the shepherd now, not just the hired hand. And tend to the flock, he says. The ones who are beginning to wander off now without a shepherd, give them what they need. Then tend to the lambs, the ones who are just learning what it means to follow, to believe in redemption and resurrection. Indeed, Spurgeon continues, here was a solemn question, which our Savior put to Peter, not for his own information. For as Peter said, thou knowest that I love thee, but for Peter's examination. It is right that Peter should examine himself. Self-examination should more especially follow sin, but examining the state of our spirit ought to be the daily habit of all of us. Examining the state of our spirit ought to be the daily habit of all of us. The question on the beach, then, is asked not just of Peter, but of each of us. Individually, do you love the Lord your God, and are you tending the ministry given to you? Individually, but collectively also, too. In preparation for our ministries together and in anticipation of the annual meeting to happen in just a few short weeks, I have been poring over the copy of the church history loaned to me by Louise. And while my favorite story has to be the time that the church accidentally called 2 ministers to come in candidate for the single position of pastor at the same time, the stories of particular note for today were the times that this place has been collectively asked whether it was in fact tending the ministries it had been given. In 1859, just 50 years after its inception, the annual meeting notes contain a rather aggressive note from the committee in charge of finances. Your committee finds no special satisfaction in presenting to you this, their annual report. But on the contrary, they feel even mortified that no more has been done, that so little has been done by you, the members of this society. Your committee is therefore of the opinion that there is something wrong, or at least, radically defective in the system in present use for the monetary support of this society. It's a rather aggressive question of whether or not the sheep were being fed. But these were not idle remarks, but remarks born from the same work as the ones we take on in 2 weeks. They're born from a people invested in this place, but not sure how to go on. What is our purpose? Are we meeting the needs of God or simply our own? So too the question of covenant came up early and resurfaced several times in the history. Covenant, that question of how we walk with one another faithfully, came up as early as, get this, 1805. That's right, just 3 months after the church had been founded, the church split in 2 over the doctrinal question of the Trinity. The questions Jesus asks are hard. What does it mean to be in covenant with one another? What are the limits of that covenant? And what is our role, each of us, in supporting it? These questions appear throughout the 214 years of our history together, through the splits and the fissures, the social crises and the internal strife. They appear in times of abundance and scarcity, strain and celebration. They occur through the splits, the disagreements, the disputes that must necessarily occur in the life of any church who takes these questions seriously. Not because they are questions of rebuke, but because they are the central questions of renewal, of change, and of resurrection. They are essential to the rejuvenation of a place after a transition. Is there still a love for the sacred in this place? The eternal, the timeless? And if so, what is our role in feeding the sheep? As we begin a new chapter together, we must, of course, gaze at our history here and all the work that has been done in the name of God in Burlington, Vermont, the possibility shops and the mission trips, the labor organizations, the interfaith outreach, church schools and prayer chains, all the things that you remember and cherish and have heard and witnessed here from this pulpit. And we must lift up all the times the congregation has found itself, like Peter, on the beach, taking a walk with Jesus. All the times we have collectively renewed our vows to God and one another in this place, because that is where we are now, individually and collectively. We are on that beach. Over the next few weeks and months, you will inevitably find yourself face to face with Jesus in one form or another, who will, in some way or another, take you aside and ask, "Do you love me? How will you feed my sheep? How will you minister to the world in this time and place?" And as you are faced with those questions, may you do so with the recognition that this question is the very same opportunity given to Peter. And in an era of declining religion, Jesus asks us if we love him. The answer in 1805 was yes. The answer in 2005 was yes. And the question remains the same today as in every day, because new opportunities, for Peter's second chances and third and fourth, they are never about what has been done. Not about what happened, but about who we are now and who we want to be. Thanks be to God.